these are two topics, Bitcoin and Catholicism, I'm extremely passionate about. So I was been thinking about this for a while, and this is a presentation I wanted to do for a while and prayed about for a long time. And so when I was thinking about how I could connect the dots, I kind of had to do like some prior work and some thinking. And to your point on like the regulation side of things, yes, I'm a licensed fiduciary, state registered or regulated entity, and our slogan is prosperity but purpose, and we try to help our clients find funded contentment where money and meaning are in balance. I have a tremendous amount of joy when we're able to do that, but on the back end, it's almost like compliance. It takes up a ton of my time. It's my biggest line item, in my
Sure,
my
yeah,
budget.
it has to be.
And it almost feels like you're walking in the dark and there's like bear traps everywhere. And it's just like, well, don't step in a bear trap. And it's like, okay, well, I'm trying not to step in a bear trap. Could you turn the lights on, please?
Yeah.
It's like,
No.
yeah, exactly. And ultimately, where I think like the West is starting to fail here, and why, I think Bitcoin can really reinvigorate it, is I think humans are technological beings. I think that's actually, a gift from God. Like, we've created beautiful, amazing civilizations over the course of our existence, but they always have one failure, and it's when the technological superior civilization centralizes the money. That is the bane of human existence. And usually when a civilization is on the rise, there's some sort of technological schism that allows for a new paradigm shift. And it's usually ambitious young men that are leading that charge and on the forefront of building. And while we're like in the building phase, that's tend to be when like markets are the freest, market signals are the most clear, because capitalists are deploying capital and creating more capital. And that usually tends to be good for a long time, right? This is like the gilded age of any civilization. It's like on the rise. That's like when there's like the least amount of regulation and red tape, because people can go out and do what they feel called to do. The issue is when the bureaucrats get involved. It's like, I think it's like the worst type of people are attracted to power. And so after you've been on the rise for a long time and it's milk and honey everywhere, we have the people who can't compete in a free and open market, so they have to compete in lawfare. Right. And it really is almost a tale as old as time, because almost every civilizational collapse is like the same story. It's nothing to do with the technology. It's everything to do with the people who corrupt the technology or the civilization that once got them to these great heights. And I really kind of, with that background, Lynn Alden and Larry Lepard are two great advocate and economists in the Bitcoin space that I've really enjoyed reading their work, and inspired me to ultimately, create this presentation and try to educate Catholics on why our current financial system is failing and why we need to look for an alternative.
Yeah, I think not only are some of the worst people drawn to power, I think that's especially true when you're talking about power that is not really earned.
Yes,
in a sense, right? Because that's one of the things about politics is so often it's kind of like this elevator to the top of being able to control things. But unlike, and you've had a lot of capitalists who have gone wayward, right? We could talk about Rockefellers and other, massive companies, George Soros, right? There's a lot of billionaires and Bill Gates who are, I think, not necessarily the best actors or the most well-intentioned people. But there is something unique to their rise in that they like hustled and grinded for the influence that they have versus, somebody like a Bernie Sanders who is very anti-money, anti-wealth, anti-the rich. Millionaires and billionaires are bad until I become a millionaire. And now billionaires are the evil ones, right? Because he's able to make all this money selling books and doing things that are capitalist. I think it's an interesting thing that there's so many bureaucrats in the country. Even that was one thing that I actually wanted to talk about. You had this on one of your slides, was about it was I think the slide that showed the national debt. I think it was a debt ticker.
Yeah.
And the thing that I thought was so interesting about that was the slide had how many self-employed Americans there were, which I think was around 9 million. if I'm not mistaken. I think there was like 130 million total federal like taxable people, so like income tax paying citizens, if you will. I forget what the actual like title was, but 130 million of those, there was like 9 million self-employed Americans, and then it was like 33 million government employed Americans, which to me was just thinking about like, dude, if you just, the thing that is so clarifying for me oftentimes is trying to have this, play this mind game, if you will, or a mental exercise of, let's just start with a society with 100 people. You know, like let's say like desert island. This is what I talk about when I gave a speech a few years ago on, is healthcare a human right? And I'm like, the best thing, I love the island experiment, right? Like we crash a plane, 100 or so of us survive. There's 100 people. Would we say that if somebody was a doctor, like they are forced to care for everyone with no compensation? Or who pays for it, right? Like just thinking about things like that. And there's a lot. It's an hour-long speech, so I'm not going to summarize that or get too deep into that. But thinking about this, it's like, if there was 100, would you think that 30 of them, you know, or 20 of them, like what would be the number of people who are paying for the government employees to the people who are the government employees? Like, what's that ratio look like? To me, it certainly can't be, I don't know what 130 to the 30 is, but like 4 to 1. That feels like it's probably a little off. That'd be in the group of 100. That's 80 to 20.
Yeah.
There's 80 of us, and we're supporting the salary of 20 of you who are just kind of making sure we're all playing by the rules and doing things. Can't that be 5 of you? You know, that do that?
Yeah.
Like, do we really? It should be 95-5, not 80-20, not 4 to 1. It's just insane to me that that's gotten so lopsided. But I think that goes to your point where government just continues to expand. The same thing as the tax code, right? Because every time you add 1,000 pages to the tax code, you need 1,000 new government employees to ensure that we're handling these regulations and things correctly. And you don't even have laws being passed in so many of these circumstances, which is one of, I think, Trump's best executive orders is like no more regulations for the first 90 days. Because you have people who are not even elected officials not implementing laws, because that's illegal. That is not in accord with the American system. But they just implement regulations. And yes, you still get fined, or sometimes can even go to prison if you violate those regulations. And it's not a law, so Congress doesn't have to pass it. The president doesn't need to sign it. But it's just these regulations that we just roll out and keep piling on and restricting what can and cannot happen in the United States of America, which is, yeah, no good. Very bad.
It's not. And one of my favorite economists, his name is Peter St. Onge. He has a weekly newsletter and 20-minute podcast. So it's very digestible. And he was constantly raking on the Biden administration. Yeah, we're at the point, and this is a symptom of a fiat system, but most of our government statistics are manipulated or fake. Like most notably, CPI, which is the Consumer Inflation Index. They do a lot of dirty tricks with this. So, they used to have, grade A beef or, sirloin steak as that category of like meat. And so they sub it out for, like 70% lean ground beef. So it's like they do all these things in the back end. It's like, no, prices aren't rising. Like, be docile.
You can get the cheaper version of the thing we used to track.
Exactly.
For the same price that the old thing used to be. Yeah. Your filet mignon is now the cost of a New York strip.
Yes.
Or New York strip is the cost of what filet used to cost. And so therefore prices are the same because they're both red meat.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he's been really on top of the drastic growth of government employees and the government trotting these out. It's like, oh, look at these job numbers. Like, they're great. Well, you're just hiring federal employees with printed money. It's actually not great at all.
Yeah. That's always my favorite stat, is how many jobs are added under each presidency. And it's like, the president doesn't add jobs to the economy. That's not a thing that happens. Not in a well-run economy, at least. Jobs are only added by private citizens and when their businesses grow and flourish, right? Not by the president. I'd never understand. I think that's such a stupid statistic.
Well, and that's why I get really frustrated with like the Bernie bros and like the blue hair baristas, because like capitalism's our problem. And my rebuttal to that is like, we live in a socialist society right now.
Right.
We have a government that is designed to grow bigger. And there's a famous, or hopefully gets more famous, I can't remember the court case, I think it was Valero, or started with a V, but it really just set the precedent for agencies to enact regulations. And so
Yeah.
it's like the EPA was like, okay, these are the regulations you have to follow. And to your point, like these aren't laws. They're not passed by Congress. They were not enacted by individuals who were voted on by the American people.
No.
These are career bureaucrats that are deciding how the economy works, how the government is run. And we actually have very little say in that.
Yeah. I have to get you a copy of this book. One of the professors in leadership program of the Rockies, his name's Tom Cranwood. He wrote this great book. It's a satirical book called Save the Swamp. And it's like a bureaucrat's guide to their career. And it is, man, really, really good.
I need to read that.
It's
for
really,
sure.
really hilarious. Yeah. I'll look for it when we're done here to see if I have it here. I think it's at home. But next time you come over, I'll show you. Well, I'll definitely have to get you a copy of that. That can be your thank you for coming on the Sequence podcast.
I appreciate that.
It's so good. But yeah, it just hits on all of that, man. Of just like, you get to have all this power and control. You don't have to run for election. You're never up. Your seat's never up. He's like, this is really the way to go, and you can make a good career. It's hard to get fired. You almost can't get fired from some of these government jobs. And he just, goes on all these things, all these perks, and just basically screw the American people and don't have to run for election like other politicians do and things like that. So it's really funny. You'll enjoy that.
Yeah.
But going back to what we talked about. So let's go over a little definition. We give just a little, brief explanation to what is money, kind of how I like the history that you gave of obviously, exchanges, trading and stuff, bartering has existed for a long time, but then really escalated when this concept of money was introduced.
Totally. And I'll just back it up a little bit further as well, just to frame it in like the Catholic context here. I got this idea from Andy Flattery, who is a great Catholic man. He's also a financial advisor. He started the Bitcoin Financial Advisors Network, and he's the one that turned me on to this idea of the noblesse oblige, which stands for nobility obligates. And it's essentially about old Catholic Catholic families of old Europe who built a tremendous amount of wealth, raised saints. Like we have a long history of this, in our faith and culture of being good stewards of our wealth and taking care of our communities. And so I think it's easy to get pessimistic about, the current state of affairs, but I think you and I are actually optimists, and you have to be entrepreneurs. I consider myself a techno optimist, and I kind of think of Bitcoin as like that technological schism we were referencing earlier, and kind of like hopefully the dawn of a new golden age. And kind of so how we got here is like money really is a technology and a ledger, simply. And over the course of time, this is inspired by Lynn Alden's work. Like money has adopted to the technology and societal structures of that time. So people used to trade shells and rocks. Obviously, gold and precious metals became very commonly accepted forms of money. But any money is a medium of exchange, so it's an intermediary for you and I to exchange value. You sell a service or a product. How am I compensating you for that? It's a store of value, so it's supposed to preserve our purchasing power over time. And it's a unit of account, which is, you can kind of think of as an economic measuring stick, right? I really kind of added the fourth point, but it's like money is a market itself. If individuals had the ability to choose from them, like for themselves, they would just choose the best one that fulfills all those requirements in the best way possible. And this kind of will build on as we continue this conversation. But money is like the base market, so money and energy touch everything we do, right? So every other market is built on top of the market of money. Whether that's me selling services to my clients, it's built on the base market. And kind of like some of the nefarious things about fiat money, which is paper money. And Lynn uses a great analogy in her book about the telegraph, and that was invented in the mid 1800s, and that was a new technology that allowed information to travel at the speed of light. Well, if we were still using gold as a predominant form of money, we now had a technology where a ledger could be updated in London and then simultaneously updated in New York almost instantly. But the gold or the physical money couldn't travel that fast. So paper money or fiat money was invented, and fiat money is simply a currency without intrinsic value. It's backed by the government. which makes it flexible, but prone to inflation and mismanagement. And you can really kind of start building the picture here of how that base market of money can easily be manipulated when it's not backed by something physical and grounded in the real world.
Yeah. And just to clarify, the way that I kind of think of a ledger, and God bless Bitcoin does a really good job of explaining this, but I kind of think of it as a tracker, or like a record, if you will, of transactions.
Yeah.
Right. So a ledger is, at its base, it's kind of to think about it as your credit card statement, or if you look at your checking account, you can see all the transactions that have happened, deposits and withdrawals, but it kind of tracks that on both sides, right? There's ledgers happening kind of all over the place. So if I pay you, let's say I Venmo you, right? Venmo is contacting USAA on my end to secure, make sure that I have the money, taking the money out of my account, which tracks on that ledger for my checking account, puts it into Venmo, and then Venmo puts it into your Venmo account, and then Venmo puts it into, Chase or whatever bank you use, right? And there's kind of the transactions at each kind of stage of that, and the kind of receipts are tracking all the things that have happened. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And when the technology emerged for ledgers to be updated, in that fashion, they needed a money to accompany that. And
That's
so
speed.
obviously, yeah, exactly. And at the time, that was a good thing. I think that actually opened up markets and made them more global and more accessible, which allowed more market participants to partake. And that ultimately is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think it's just a very easy way to think about money. The problem is our current financial system looks nothing like that simple T-chart you learned in accounting
Right.
101.
Yeah.
It's actually gotten extremely bloated, and there's a 800-pound gorilla in the room called the U.S. Federal Reserve that is putting their finger on the scale and manipulating that base market of money. And that's where I think
credit card companies and all these other things that take out little transaction fees along the way and all that as well, that I think just very much complicate the system.
Yeah.
Because you can think about it, I think the easiest way to kind of just make it a simple example, if I just hand you $5, that's just $5 from me to now you own that $5. But really, when things did become, because that's kind of the next step, I'm assuming too, that you get into where paper money is introduced. But then now you made this point the other night where it's like pretty much all electronic anyways, right? Like there's very few of us. I have $2 cash in my wallet right now. I know this because we were just looking to pay for parking earlier today. And so instead of me handing you $1 and now I lost $1, you have $1, and that's not really tracked anywhere. Now, even with the credit card companies, like it's so funny that nobody even knows what Visa does. They're just on every credit card, and it's just like this $1 trillion company. But it's because they take these transaction fees, or Square. So I pay with my Visa on your Square card, right? If you're buying a Seeking Excellence t-shirt or something, it's like all these different banks and communications between banks is so complicated. And there's all this money is kind of sucked away throughout the whole process, right? Of a kind of every little step along the way.
Yeah. And, as a capitalist, being charitable, Visa does provide a service. They've built out like these rails. I'm not saying like they shouldn't receive a fee for that service, but, if you just zoom out, the whole system is extremely bloated and overly complex. Yeah, I called it, complexity by design.
Yeah.
And it's very unnatural. And the only people who create unnatural systems are bureaucrats. Right. And the Leviathan, the managerial class, because they don't actually have value to add.
Right.
They need to preserve the power that they've captured. Right. So these aren't the builders. Any sort of entrepreneur would see our current financial system, if they were able to build it by scratch and overly simplify it. Right. And because it's complex,
especially if they were actually fiduciaries.
And have the best interest.
They were actually meant to serve the American people and do what's best for them instead of just looking out for themselves and their friends and making more jobs.
Yeah.
For no reason.
No, totally. And, to that point, I don't think a lot of people know this. Like the Federal Reserve was created in 1913. It's it's barely over 100 years old. America's about to turn 250. So actually for almost the majority of this country's existence, the Federal Reserve wasn't around.
right?
And a lot of historians argue like the Gilded Age of America was actually like early 1900s, late 1800s, like
Hmm.
even before the existence of the Federal Reserve. And to your point, the Federal Reserve is a private public partnership. Like
Hmm.
it's owned partly by the government, partly by big banks. And there's a board of governors, and it is very much like a boys club. There's a great podcast I'll send you. You can maybe include in the show notes, but just historian kind of like looking into the depths of the Federal Reserve. Like a lot of these records do eventually become public, and it is very 12 Federal Reserve Board governors that serve the branches across the country: San Francisco, Minneapolis, St. Louis, Kansas City, New York, like 12 of these, and they vote on various issues, and it's very taboo to dissent and not have all 12 board governors on the same page. It's
Wow.
just like once you're in the system. And do I think like a lot of these people had nefarious intentions from the start? Probably not. I like not to think so, but it's a little bit of a groupthink mentality and part of our human nature. It's like once you're in it, like it's hard to see something else, and you just feel like you're that much more important and all of that.
Yeah.
And so, this really in particular came down to like this historian on the podcast, goes in like the 2008 financial crisis and like quantitative easing. And I think like really like the point of no return when we just became dependent on printing money and continuous money growth is that only one person, dissented against that, and their career was essentially ruined. They didn't get the job at the big bank afterwards. And so, it was
Wow.
exiled as a black sheep. So, there's really like this human element to all of this that has like influence. That's where, I personally think, and you bring in the Catholic moral worldview again, like we need to call a spade, where it's like, I think a lot of these people worship a lower power. They propagate human suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. The human suffering aspect of it is so big with so many of these things that are pushed through, whether it's regulation or laws, where on the surface it's so tricky with Catholic teaching. I think with a lot of monetary policy or economics or even just leftism as a whole, whether it's Black Lives Matter or it's electric vehicles or it's immigration, right? It's so easy for them on the surface to make it seem like, oh, isn't this so mean? Oh, they want to cut back the government. You guys think there's 30 million too many? Well, how many should there be? You're just gonna fire 10 million people. They have families to support, all this stuff. It's like, yeah, but they suck the life out of 100, 200 million people, 300 million people. So yes, they actually have to go find other jobs and actually produce like the rest of us, and not just be like a drain on the system. Yes, that's true. Oh, you guys like immigration is so bad. It's like, okay, yeah, we want there to be less crime. And actually, if you look at it even deeper, there's human trafficking, drug trafficking. The cartels are taking over Mexico and our border and a lot of the United States. That's bad. That's much worse than sending some people back to the country where they were born and raised and lived most of their lives, right?
Yeah.
That's much more immoral. Or going back to the fracking, all these things like we need to care about the planet, and natural gas and oil are so bad. Okay, well, are you ready to just thrust millions of people around the world into immense poverty and starvation because you're just getting rid of fertilizer and you're getting rid of oil and natural gas, and you're going to jack up energy prices saying that they have to have, run nuclear power or be solar powered in Africa? It's like they can't afford these things. So you're just totally cutting them out, at the knees. But it's on the surface, everything seems so good, right? Socialism, leftism, like all that seems so good on the surface. And I think that's a lot of times true with the financial policies. Like people are going to take advantage of you. So we have to have 60 million regulations for financial advisors rather than going back to the first golden age, which was really before not just the Fed, but so many regulations and unnecessarily laws and regulations that really just tampered the American spirit.
No, 100%. And yeah, I do think money printing at its core is evil. And to your point on like the debt clock, you can go to usdebt.org, and it's just like the numbers like update so fast. Like our debt is increasing. Like the numbers are
It's
just
over
like
100K per person.
it's insane. No, yeah, it's really wild. And what really concerns me and why I'm so bullish and optimistic on Bitcoin is in our federal budget. the top two line items are Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. These
Mhm.
are our welfare programs, which again, is like what I was mentioning earlier, it's like we already live in a socialist society, like we are literally spending the top two on welfare programs. The third is literally our interest on debt. Usually, how this is supposed to work, or, kind of like the social contract in the US, is like we have free markets. You guys go out and do whatever you do, add value. We're just going to take a little bit to, fund these public services. Well, as we know, that's not really the contract anymore. And,
Right.
we spend so much where our tax receipts aren't able to fund all the obligations we have outstanding as a country. So we need to issue debt
Mhm.
in order to make up the gap. And it's getting, very concerning, in my opinion, because we've surpassed debt to GDP of 120%. Japan has been the only country in the history of the world, or at least civilized world, to have surpassed that without a major economic or currency collapse. So it's just kind of a novel number there. And there's some like unique things about their economy, which has allowed them to do so. So we predominantly fund our ventures on debt, which means, we're borrowing from the future, and there needs to be somebody to buy debt, right? This used to be sovereign nations. It's like if I'm Germany or China, it's like, oh, this is a good deal. The US is issuing some treasury bonds. I'll buy those and I'll get paid back interest. Well, if you keep issuing debt, it's not as good a deal anymore. But there still
Right.
needs to be, a buyer. This is a market after all. So it's like, okay, we need more dollars. So we're going to issue debt to get the dollars. Well, who's going to buy that? Well, now it really ends up being the Federal Reserve that is like buying the debt, and they're doing so with printed money. So the Federal Reserve funds the Treasury with printed money. And the nefarious thing about this is that ultimately leads to inflation. I mentioned, I think CPI is a fake stat. So when I'm sitting down with my clients and doing a financial plan or whatever, I use just money creation as the inflation rate. And that averages out to be about 6 to 8% over the last 2 years, year over year. So
Wow.
you, as a hardworking market participant, are getting debased. Your wealth is being stolen from you silently, which is even worse. They're not even telling it to your face. It's just kind of happening in the background by 6 to 8%. 30-40% of all money in circulation has been printed over the last 6 years. And this is kind of like Lynn Alden has this meme where it's like, nothing stops this train. It's the cat's out of the bag. It's like you're not putting it back in there. It's just like, what do you do next? And that's why I'm really encouraging Catholics to have an open mind about Bitcoin.
Yeah. Dude, it's crazy to think about that. So that means that, the average stock market return, if you're just, investing in like the S&P 500, somewhere from between 8 to 12%, right? Typically. And so that means that if you're on like the lower end of that, right? If you're not really aggressively in like the higher, more aggressive stocks, that you're just, even if you're making 8%, that's just keeping your money the same.
Yeah, you're breaking even.
Yeah, so with 8%, bro, that is absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah. Well, and there are, a lot of, like we said, it's complexity by design. So there's hidden dynamics that, allow them to do this. I really want to emphasize, like, these are unnatural systems, right? Like it's not supposed to be this way. It shouldn't be this way.
It's supposed to be what we talked about earlier, where you hand me $5 and you lost $5 and I gained $5.
Yes,
right? That's
yeah.
how simple it's supposed to be.
Yeah, you
and
just can't
nobody else
create
even
more.
needs to know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're just private citizens, just doing private business.
Yes, exactly. And that's, that's biblical.
Right.
It's like neighbor to neighbor. It's like we don't need a tyrant. It's like
there's not some third party that says, "Whoa, did you just give him $5? Like, what's it? Why do you care?"
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
Yeah,
That's one of the things I love to say about Bitcoin. It's like no tyrant needed. It's like we don't need that third party intermediary. It's like, oh, is that a legal transaction? It's like, yes. Or are you sure? It's like, well, it's none of your business.
Right.
It's like,
So tell me, so is this a good place to kind of get into the definition of Bitcoin? Or is there stuff you want to share?
Yeah,
Anything else
no.
you want to kind of lay the foundation?
It is. So I'll just read this here. So Bitcoin is a decentralized, censorship-resistant digital currency with a fixed supply, enabling secure, transparent, and trustless peer-to-peer transactions across a global borderless network.